Hey guys, and thanks for listening to another episode of the Scene to Screen Film Podcast. I'm Kieran, and joining me yet again this week is my good pal AJ Tarrant.
How you doing, guys?
So hey man, how have you been? What have you been up to since last week? And I guess most importantly, what have you been watching this week?
Yeah, I've been pretty good. Just starting looking into some work stuff that I'm hopefully starting soon. I've been watching an anime series. It's like one of the most acclaimed of all time, Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. I usually watch more sort of weird anime that are sort of out there, but I thought, it's a really sort of famous one, and if I want to say that I know about anime, I should probably have seen it. And I'm really enjoying it so far. I'm about 16, 17 episodes through, and apparently it just keeps getting better, so I'm enjoying it. What about you, man?
Well, just like last week, I've been catching up with Star Trek Discovery, and I actually caught up to the latest episode this week. So things are really starting to get good. I think there's just one or maybe two episodes left. So we're getting into the more serious storytelling. Some major characters and stuff are starting to die. So yeah, it's getting really good. I've been watching that. I saw a few of the newer film releases this week. Earlier this week, I saw Maze Runner: The Death Cure, which I actually thought was quite good. I think that film and that trilogy as a whole might surprise a few people. I wouldn't say it's great, but if you're ever bored and looking for something to watch, it's definitely worth throwing on. I'm sure it'll come on Netflix and stuff at some point. And then just the other day, I got to see an early screening of The Shape of Water, which I absolutely loved. And both of those reviews are also now up, so I guess you guys can go and check those out after this. But yeah, I spent a lot of my time in the cinema this week, and thankfully I don't feel like any of it was wasted. Alright, so getting into this week's movie-related topic, we're going to be talking about our top 5 movies of all time this week. So this is pretty much the biggest episode we've done so far. It's definitely the most difficult, at least for me, because until this week I'd never actually sat down and written up a list or anything like that, so I'm really excited to get into it, and I guess we'll just start off with your first film.
Yeah, so I've been looking forward to this episode. In another episode that we have done in our top 5 directors, which is either out now or will be out soon, I talked about some of my favourite films from some of my favourite directors. And because I already talked about them, I thought, I already have a top 10 that I've sort of structured a while ago, so I thought I'll cut those ones out and I'll focus on the ones I haven't mentioned yet. So I'll start off with my first one, which is Memories of Murder by Bong Joon-ho. It's his second film, and I think it's one of the most finely crafted detective movies of all time. Like, it's up there with The Maltese Falcon and Kurosawa's Stray Dog, just to name a couple. Where to start with it? A good place is to point out how underrated it is, criminally so, I'd say. Considering how much attention Old Boy receives, Park Chan-wook's most famous film, I'm surprised that Memories of Murder is still sort of obscure. Like, this film is a masterpiece. In my opinion, very few films have kind of attained such perfect film form as this. Many of those that have often sacrifice narrative for style, but Memories of Murder attains both, I think, and it's also so much more on top of that. The story itself is actually rooted in reality. It's based around the hunt in the mid to late 80s for South Korea's first serial killer in the mostly rural city of Hwasong. We primarily follow these two detectives. The first one's Detective Park, who's played by the unstoppably excellent Song Kang-ho, and he's sort of lazy to the point of corruption, preferring to frame suspects rather than do any real police work. And the other one's Detective So, who's like a young, by-the-book cop who's been sent from Seoul to assist the investigation. The way these characters develop naturally throughout the film is done in a very sort of classic way, but the way that it's done, it's done so right, and it's pretty much the definition of good character development. Memories of Murder achieves that, certainly. By the culmination of the plot, you understand fully where each detective is coming from, which makes the conclusion all the more powerful. The narrative itself unfolds with absolute precision, but what's going on underneath is what truly elevates Memories of Murder from pure police procedural to the subversive and fascinating film that it is. It's a film that draws attention to South Korea's dark and authoritarian past, and it shows a rural police force completely unprepared for the appearance of a methodical and ruthless serial killer. The chaos it entails is perfectly presented in the discovery of the body of the second victim, which is portrayed in this one long 2-minute shot as Detective Park attempts to secure the area, deal with his bumbling subordinates and superiors who are sort of falling down this little ditch into the thing, making a complete sort of mockery. The press is there sort of suddenly out of nowhere. The farmer appears whose field it is on his tractor, and he's got sort of run over there. And I think that sort of, it plays out with a great deal of humour, something that Pong is noted for. But his humour always feels like an extension and a highlighting of the absurdity of the situation, rather than like an attempt to just make it funny for the sake of it, which is why I think like this scene's kind of emblematic of how well this film handles its situation, because it's a very serious situation, but the characters in it, they don't really know how serious it is yet. We're also shown like scenes that reflect the time period that it's set in, including one portraying the brutal suppression of student riots that happened a lot of the time then. Because it's set, I think it's between sort of 1985 to sort of maybe 1990, which isn't really shown in the film, but that's the time period when South Korea had this dictatorship. And one of the other detectives, this cruel and unusual detective called Cho, who's Park's original partner, he actually takes part in the suppression of the riots, like relishing the opportunity basically just to be violent. And these scenes serve to back up the narrative and the themes. It's portraying a government more concerned with protecting itself than its citizens, which reflects upon the fact that they don't have any they don't have the services to catch this killer. There's actually one point of the film where they need to stage this incredibly tense, like, trap for the killer, but they don't have anyone to do it with because a lot of the policemen have been taken away to suppress another riot across the country. So I think the film is heavily allegorical, using the case of South Korea's first serial killer to highlight what life was like for the poor and less fortunate in the country at the time. Bong Joon-ho gets this across, again, without sacrificing narrative. The message is not forced on the audience, it's one that you gain through paying attention to the details on screen. The final shot in particular is notable in what it's saying directly to the audience, particularly one member of the audience. To say any more would be a spoiler, but I consider it to be one of the most audacious final shots in cinema history. I've written about Memories of Murder and its themes further in a blog post, so if you're interested in reading more, then we'll put a link in the description for you to have a look at. If you're listening on iTunes, you can go and find us on Facebook, and the link will be in the description there. My post does have spoilers though, so I'd suggest watching the film first. It really does deserve to be seen without knowing too much of the plot. And I'd also like to recommend a video on YouTube, Every Frame a Painting. That's the channel Memories of Murder Ensemble Staging. I didn't discuss any of the film form because basically Tony of Every Frame a Painting, he does it way better than I ever could, so I highly recommend watching them if you're interested in the film. If you like South Korean, Asian films generally, or even the work of David Fincher, Zodiac almost feels like a Western remake of this film. I'd highly recommend Memories of Murder. I feel like in years to come it'll get properly reappraised and included in best of all time lists, finally getting the appreciation that it deserves.
Yeah, so this is a film that I've not had a chance to watch yet, but it's actually been on my to watch list for a really long time because I think maybe you and a few other people have told me to check it out in the past. I have looked it up and I've watched trailers and stuff, and everything I've seen from it looks really good, and it's got that kind of dark, kind of black comedy that I usually really like. So this is definitely a film that I'll be trying to find time to watch in the next week or so. Like I said, I've finished Star Trek, so I probably have some more time on my hands. But yeah, I can't really say much more than that, so I'll just move on to my first film. And I want to say as well that I don't really consider this list to be a ranking, so just because I'm talking about this film first doesn't mean that it's my least favourite or my most favourite. It's just the film that I've kind of decided to talk about first. But the film that I'm going to be talking about is Denis Villeneuve's Arrival. And I know that this is quite a new film, and a lot of people might kind of scoff at the idea of this being in my top 5, but I probably knew that Arrival was one of my favourite films the second that the credits started to roll. This is an alien invasion movie for a different kind of audience. You don't get a lot of explosions, action, and any space battles. You do get a lot of tense sequences, a lot of dramatic kind of explorations of character, and at the centre of the film is this really raw kind of emotion. This is a serious sci-fi film. I connect with it on a storytelling level and an emotional level. Villeneuve proved himself to be an expert filmmaker with a few of his earlier films, but I think Arrival is the one that will always kind of mark the moment where he kind of entered the conversation and kind of threw his hat in to be considered as one of the best directors working today. I don't doubt that people will kind of forget about and maybe disregard Arrival now that Blade Runner 2049 has kind of pushed Villeneuve into the mainstream, but I do think that Arrival is still his best work in science fiction. And then you've got this cast. Amy Adams is the lead of this film. A lot of the time in science fiction you get a really over-sexualized female character, but Amy Adams is incredible in this film, and I do think that she was really badly snubbed at the awards in 2016 2016. Her performance was so powerful and so human, and she really carried that entire film by herself. But of course, Jeremy Renner was also in there, and he was also really good in this film. In fact, if it wasn't for Wind River last year, I'd say that Arrival was probably Renner's best performance. He doesn't have a massive role compared to Amy Adams, but even with his smaller role, he's able to give an incredible performance, and he gets a lot of emotion and personality out of his character. And then for a second, I do want to talk about two very special characters in this film, and that's Abbott and Costello, who are the two aliens in the film. And I think the design of the aliens, the personality, and the kind of portrayal of the heptapods in this film, I thought that was really cool. I liked that they weren't the typical kind of alien bad guys, and they were on Earth for a reason, and you kind of really grew to care about both of them. So yeah, Arrival is the first of my 5 films.
Completely agree with you. I'd like in everything you said there was completely spot on, from the design of the aliens to Amy Adams being snubbed. She really was. And also, yeah, it's my favourite Villeneuve film as well. I think it was really sort of mature work. And I love a lot of his other films. Prisoners in particular is one that I really like. But I think Arrival was just next level, and I think it's better than 2049 as well. I think that's like a great pick for a Villeneuve film. It's such a unique sci-fi film. It's like you've got hard science fiction where they focus on the science of things, and this is like that but with language. It's like hard linguistics, and I thought that element was genius. Absolutely love it. So my number 4 is Dogtooth by Yorgos Lanthimos. Now, there are dysfunctional families, and then there's the family in Dogtooth. Lanthimos, he's created this satirical, scrutinizing statement about authority and submission, and it's not an easy watch a lot of the time, but it has a lot to say about the state of his country, as well as the very idea of being a family unit itself. This feels like he's turned his eye onto his own society and he's trying to sort of find out exactly what's wrong with it, which I think is like a sign of a very sort of mature and brave filmmaker. Language itself is deconstructed in such a dystopian light in this film that Orwell would be proud of it. And the influence of popular media, in a surprise twist, is actually shown as rebellious and positive, especially when put alongside the authoritarian alternative that's presented. The family that Dogtooth centers on are not by any stretch of the imagination normal. The mother and father, they keep their children sheltered away in this large isolated house. It's more of a compound than a home, and they tell absurd tales about killer cats and tiny aeroplanes and twist their children's minds with false definitions of words and these well-placed props to sort of further this fake narrative they've created for them. The father is some kind of government official, and he's clearly the true leader of the family, because although the mother is complicit in all of the bad things that they're doing, even she is sometimes lowered to the status of a lapdog. Lanthimos is telling the audience that his culture is sick, but sadly even he doesn't know the cure. I personally don't think Lanthimos has topped Dogtooth yet. He's come very close with almost every film, but then again, to be honest, neither of many other directors. I feel Dogtooth in many ways even supersedes the work of other similarly caustic directors such as Haneke or Von Trier. Lanthimos almost reminds me of Chris Morris, the British comedy writer responsible for Brass Eye and Jam, and also reminds me of Kafka a lot as well, in how he concocts moral quandaries and impossible situations for his characters to navigate, all while knowing that they won't be able to succeed no matter how hard they try. But Lanthimos has more sympathy for his characters than Morris or Kafka. His characters are products of their environment, so their failings are kind of the failings of all of us, or at least the ones that he's presenting in his culture. Now, Dogtooth is an uncomfortable watch. It's definitely not family viewing, but that's part of the reason why it's so compelling. You often want to look away or squirm, but the camera doesn't look away, so you can't either. It's not an exploitative film, even if it sometimes feels like one. It is instead somehow deeply human, presenting us with main characters that are physically adults but mentally children, a son and 2 daughters so removed from any semblance of human life that they should be alien, but they aren't. Their natural curiosity is still there, and although we don't get much hope out of the film, Lanthimos shows that even in submission, certain human elements remain. When a new figure is introduced into the household, someone from the outside world that the father brings in, the children's interest is piqued, and by the end of it, you feel like everything that has happened has been inevitable, like it wasn't going to happen any other way, as soon as that sort of line is breached with someone else coming into the family circle. But there is humour too, often of the darkest, blackest darkest kind, and often in moments where it should feel inappropriate. But Lanthimos fuses these clashing aspects so well that you don't even realise. It's not a film I can watch that often due to how well it retains its power and atmosphere throughout multiple viewings, but it's certainly one that's going to stick with me for a long time, and that's why I consider it easily one of my favourite films.
Yeah, unfortunately, this is yet another film that I haven't seen yet, but again, it's a film that I really do want to see. I've mentioned in previous episodes of the podcast that I really like Lanthimos. As far as films go, I really enjoyed The Lobster. It was one of my favourite films of 2015, I think. So I've been meaning to kind of go back and watch some of his earlier films. And then there's Killing of a Sacred Deer as well, which I still haven't seen. So yeah, another film that I haven't seen, but another one that I do really want to kind of go back and watch. And it's really starting to sound like I don't watch many of these kind of artistic foreign films, but I promise I do. I'm just getting into them now and I am just catching up, so I think I might start with Dogtooth this coming week. But yeah, I'll move on to my next film, and the next film that I'm going to talk about is one that had a big influence on me when I was a kid, because, and I think I've mentioned this in a previous episode, but when I was younger I didn't watch Star Wars. I don't think I watched the original Star Wars trilogy until like 2015, so that never really played a big role when I was a kid, kind of growing up. It didn't influence me in the same way as it did some of the people that I've met knowing about film, talking about film and all that kind of stuff. And all those people that I've met were absolutely in love with Star Wars, and it's all they watched when they were kids. But when I was younger, the film that I would always kind of want to watch, and the film that I always begged my mum to put on, was Indiana Jones. I absolutely loved and clearly still love the Indiana Jones movies, and for this topic I'm specifically talking about Raiders of the Lost Ark because everyone knows that Raiders is the best one. And it's really difficult for me to kind of sum up why Raiders is one of my favourite movies because, like I said, it's something that I've loved since I was a kid, but more than anything else, I think this is just a really fun, wacky, cool, and at times it is kind of a scary adventure movie, and we've still never seen a film really like it. Not even the other Indiana Jones sequels were able to capture that pure kind of fun adventure. This film has pretty much everything going, everything you could want in a good adventure film. You've got scary Nazi villains, a badass funny hero who kills the Nazi villains, and I don't know about you, but if you want an audience and kids to kind of love your films and your main hero, just have them kill a couple of Nazis. It usually does the trick. Harrison Ford is amazing in this role. I know that a lot of people will kind of see him and think Han Solo or Deckard from Blade Runner, but to me he's Indiana Jones, and I think he's probably at his best, and this is probably his best performance. Watching the films you can kind of see how much fun Harrison Ford is having playing this character. This is a film that helped to build the landscape of cinema today, and I do know that they are making a new one, so I just really hope they don't mess it up like they did last time. But yeah, Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark is definitely in my top 5.
Yeah, it is easily one of the best adventure films ever made. It's kind of like just one of those watertight films that, you know, if you're looking at it from a pure fun value, like it's pretty much like a 10 out of 10 kind of thing because it doesn't let up. And yeah, I mean, Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones, in a lot of ways, I think he is better as Indiana Jones than even Deckard or Han Solo. Like, it's almost like this was the role that was truly made for him. I think it's probably one of Spielberg's greatest films as well because it's got no inhibitions. It just wants you to kind of get on board, and as long as you're alright with fun, you're going to like Indiana Jones, and if you don't like fun, then where's the point in even watching films? So I'll go in with my number 3, and that's Koyana Scazzi by Godfrey Reggio. This is one of the few films that I've given a 10 out of 10. There's nothing I can fault about it, aside from perhaps the fact that I find it impossible to watch on a small screen. I've seen it twice on a cinema-sized screen, and both times it blew me away. It ranks as one of the most immersive cinema experiences I've ever had. It's not fiction, but it has like an artist created narrative, and it's a documentary, but there's no narration, no interviews, so it's very sort of atypical for what it is. It is ultimately a meditation on modern humanity and the progress of technology and where it might take us, and although it was released in 1982, it has lost none of its impact, and its visual portrayal of humanity separating itself from nature is as stunning and powerful as it must have been upon original release. Cinematographer Ron Frick constructed the film from footage that he shot of basically anything he just thought looked good on film, or what he called the form of things, from random people on the street to buildings being demolished. and his time-lapse techniques were pioneering, and the film's reliance on them doesn't feel gimmicky either. It feels fresh and original, even in the modern era where everyone and their mum can film time-lapse on their phones. The story, as it were, unfolds very slowly at first, but the first two shots kind of present us with a cinematic equivalent of a thesis statement. The first one is of cave paintings, and then it cuts after that straight away to a close-up of the fire of the Apollo 11 rocket launch. So after this, we're taken through this tour of mountain ranges in Utah, I believe, and the camera sort of turns up to the sky, and then we go up to the clouds, and then the sea, and then back to the mountains. So we get this sort of journey around the sort of natural environments of the Earth before a huge excavation truck is revealed through a hard cut with all this spewing black smoke and sort of menacing sort of music, which I'll get to the music later. These early parts of the film, they're showing humanity's progress in almost like an entirely negative light at first, with all this industrial sprawl and clunking destructive machinery. But once we actually see human beings, which were introduced through a genius hard cut from an atomic explosion straight to people sunbathing on a beach, the film seems to focus instead on human achievements, and it sort of moves between these two stances of like technology good, technology bad, a lot throughout the film, showing both the destruction and the wonder that the human race is responsible for. The title, Koyaanisqatsi, is a Native American Hopi word that means unbalanced life, or life out of balance as the alternate title of the film describes it, and this is a great summation of what the film's all about. It shows us, without any real condemnation or judgment, the good and the bad that humans do, and how these two extremes make life unbalanced for the entire Earth. It does this better than any environmentalist documentary could, specifically due to the way that it steps back and just allows the imagery to speak for itself. Of course, I have to mention the score by Philip Glass, who I consider to be one of the greatest modern composers. It's easily one of the most memorable in cinema history, I think. Glass's minimalist soundtrack has appeared in many other films as well, and other media since, including Zack Snyder's Watchmen and one of the Grand Theft Auto 4 trailers. Although the imagery is powerful enough on its own, Glass gives the film its own voice, literally. The deep chanting of the title throughout the film makes it feel alive in a way I've not seen in another film. Koyaanisqatsi is as unique as cinema comes, I think. It's a singular journey through human achievements that will leave you thinking for years to come, and that's why, along with the fact that it is basically perfect as a sort of single piece of art, why I sort of have it happily in my top 10.
This is yet another film that I haven't seen, but I think this is kind of good. It's kind of displaying that we've both got really different kind of tastes, and in my defence, this looks like a really kind of obscure kind of documentary film, but it does look really interesting. I watched the trailer just a few minutes before we started recording, so I do have a basic idea of what the film would kind of be like, and I agree that the music does really sound awesome, but like I say, I haven't seen it, so I can't really judge, so I'll just move on to my next film. And the next film that I kind of want to talk about is a small superhero movie called Guardians of the Galaxy. And this film makes it into my top 5 because I'm a big comic book reader, and even though I never read a Guardians of the Galaxy comic before this film came out, the way that James Gunn constructed the film and its characters embodied everything I always loved about comics. It was bright, funny, vibrant, and still to this day it's my favourite adventure in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Before Guardians of the Galaxy, I think the Marvel Cinematic Universe was kind of playing it pretty safe. We'd seen all the Earthbound heroes like Captain America, Iron Man, the Hulk, and even Thor was kind of surrounded and explained in a scientific and realistic way. So when the Guardians arrived, and it was kind of this really out there and wacky science fiction fantasy film, it marked this kind of change in the MCU, and I think when we look back at this franchise when we're older, Guardians of the Galaxy will probably be the film that we kind of look back and say how great and unique it was. And then you don't get a much better cast than this. Chris Pratt came out and absolutely killed it as Star-Lord. This is the chubby actor who hadn't really played much of anything except the funny best friend in a few romantic comedies, and then suddenly he's this really buff, badass Han Solo type character, and he just completely steals the movie. I mean, just look at the opening sequence of this film. He's there, he's dancing, and it's amazing. And then you've got Zoe Saldana, who's awesome as Gamora. The chemistry between her and Chris Pratt was incredible to watch. but more than anything, she's probably the best female character in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And then Groot was awesome, and Vin Diesel's voice was a great choice. He obviously only says 3 words, but he says so much underneath them. A really great and unusual character. And then Bradley Cooper's Rocket Raccoon, the guy from the Hangover films, is voicing a raccoon, and somehow it works really well. Finally, you've got Dave Bautista, the wrestler. He's playing Drax, and hearing that, I was a little bit worried because wrestlers don't always make great actors. It took The Rock a long time to get good, but Bautista is incredible as Drax. He's powerful, he's hilarious, he gets us to tear up at a few points. Just a really great cast in general in a really funny and unique film. So yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy is definitely in my top 5.
I do like Guardians. I'm a little bit split on it, just mainly because I'm not that big on the humour, but I think the characterisation, like you say, and the way they sort of bounce off each other is just brilliant. It was that they did the Avengers better than the Avengers, which was really surprising. And yeah, Dave Bautista, he's the highlight of the film for me. I think he's just excellent. He is actually really funny. But I think you're right. I think when people look back at the Marvel films, I think there's no doubt that Guardians will be one of the ones right up the top where people are like, this was unique. This was really kind of just going out there and doing something original, which I really, really respect. So I'll go on to my number 2, which is Possession by Andrzej Żuławski. And now this is a particularly and thoroughly nasty and twisted movie. Going into Possession blind, you have no idea what awaits you, so I'll avoid outright spoilers for any of the poor unfortunate souls who haven't been exposed to this film. I love this film, but it's not one I'd recommend to many people. Most of the people I've shown it to usually react with confusion, annoyance, or in one case, full-on anger, actually genuinely annoyed at me for that I'd betrayed them by showing them this film. I can understand why. For a start, even fans of horror will find the first hour or so baffling, as we watch Sam Neill and Isabella Gianni screaming at each other, hurting each other, alienating each other. It feels like you're spying on the messiest divorce of all time, and the actors do not hold back. Some people kind of cry melodrama and they laugh at the acting for being overblown, but I think it's some of the most truthful acting I've ever seen. People do overact in real life. They gurn and scream and say ridiculous stuff, especially when you're in the midst of a really brutal argument. And anyone who's been through a nasty breakup would probably find some level of truth in this part of Possession. But this part of the film is positively tame in comparison to what comes after it. Now, Possession is a horror film, but there are no jump scares, just an ever-building sense of dread, just this sort of creeping terror. Once we start to visit Isabelle Adjani's character in her squalid flat that she's been hiding out in, we realise that something is very, very wrong. Her acting is one of the finest things in this film, and I have a lot of good to say about this film, but she is one of the best parts, easily. She's always teetering on the edge of madness, but she lets these moments of quiet break through, revealing a sensitivity and almost naivety to a character that belies a lot of her actions. There are a number of notable scenes that contain just her, and every one of them is memorable. Most of all, the infamous scene in an underground sort of subway passage, which is something that no matter how many times I see it, it still freaks the hell out of me. This film is, by all accounts, Żuławski's breakup film. He wrote and directed it in the midst of a divorce, and it shows. But he doesn't fall prey to any sort of male superiority by casting the main character as innocent. No, he deconstructs both sides of it entirely. A work this personal is almost painful to watch, and it's astounding that he turned a divorce film into the odyssey of madness that Possession ends up being. Coming back to genre, while remaining in the horror, sort of vague horror category, Possession blends many styles together, occasionally dropping in new elements, even whilst the film is starting to wrap up. The last 10-15 minutes are incredibly strange. You never know what it's got up its sleeve, and the shocks they just keep coming. It's a film that starts strong and just keeps topping itself with each new insane scene. It's got a really memorable cast. Sam Neill's brilliant as ever, and Isabella Gianni is amazing. There's a character called Heinrich. I'm not sure who plays him, but he's one of the strangest film characters I've ever seen, and very, very memorable. It's got brilliant aesthetic. I love the way it looks. It's got a fantastic sort of 80s horror synth score going on, and it's got a depth to it that it likes to keep hidden, something that I tend to respect in a film. It's a piece of art that refuses to give up all of its secrets, and I love it all the more for that. I've read a lot into Possession, and I've written a fair bit too, most of it just me trying to get my ideas down on paper to see if I can figure it all out. But at the end of the day, whatever it means doesn't change one simple thing, which is also the main reason I adore the film, and that is that Possession is is one of the most intense and visceral films ever made. Any film that has the potential to be so thoroughly unpleasant to watch, while simultaneously being unrelentingly gripping, is good in my books. And this is probably the best film that I've seen that does both of those things at the same time. The first time I saw it, I admit I felt kind of robbed. I didn't like it after I'd finished it. I didn't really understand what it was all about. The final scene is absolutely baffling, and to be honest, it continues to be, even after watching it many times since. But it's a film that rewards the observant viewer, and it will stick with you after it finishes, forcing you to try to unravel its mysteries yourself. Even before my second viewing, I already knew that it was going to be one of my all-time favourites, and it's stayed that way ever since. Yeah, it's a love it or hate it movie. If you'd watched 20 minutes of it, you'd probably have known whether you were going to like the rest, because even though it changes a lot after the 1 hour mark, the tone stays the same, so I think you can kind of get an idea of whether you're going to enjoy it by then. I mean, I'd say it's worth watching anyway, even if you don't end up liking it, but yeah, I can completely understand why people don't like this. Same situation as me picking Mother for my top film last year. I kind of know that a lot of the films that I watch aren't going to be for everyone, and sometimes it is actually against my better judgment that I like these films, but I don't know, just for some reason I really like them. I don't know what that says about me, but who knows.
Okay, so again, Possession isn't a film that I've seen, but I have at least attempted to watch this film before, and I had to switch it off. And I remember because when I was at uni, we were at uni together, and I think it might have been you, but someone was talking to me. I can't remember who it was, but I remember someone telling me about this film. I think they even said that I probably wouldn't like it, but I found it online, and it was quite difficult to find, but I found it, and I watched maybe 20 minutes before turning it off. It just didn't work for me. I couldn't really get what was happening or what the point was, and it kind of seems like that is the point of the film, but it was just very much of an art film, and I usually don't like that kind of film. So again, it just didn't really seem like it was for me. And then Googling it before we kind of came on and started talking about it here, I saw a lot of people kind of saying the same thing as me, but I also saw a lot of people who really loved this film like you. So again, I think it just really comes down to taste. Okay, so the next film that I'm going to talk about, and it's a bit of a cheat because I'm throwing The Lord of the Rings in there. I know that it's a trilogy, but really those 3 movies kind of tell one massive story, and it's really one big film. So as a whole, they are one of my favourite films of all time. But just for this topic, I'll narrow it down to my personal favourite of those 3 films, and that's the extended edition of the first film, The Fellowship of the Ring. I know that a lot of people will argue that Return of the King is the better film in the trilogy, but for me The Fellowship is the better film just because I liked seeing how this great kind of epic adventure started, and that entire first section of the film where we spend all that time in Hobbiton with Bilbo, we see the birthday party, before everything got so doom and gloom and apocalyptic. I think Fellowship was more of a fun adventure film, and that's not to say that I don't enjoy the other 2 films because they're in my favourites as well, but seeing The Fellowship come together for me is the highlight of that entire trilogy. And I think when trying to figure out why I loved this film and this entire trilogy so much, I found it difficult because it is just so amazing. But I think the main reason I personally love this trilogy is because of the direction. Peter Jackson did an amazing job of telling this story, and in every frame you can kind of see how much he cares about this world and this story and these characters. On top of that, the cast is incredible. Elijah Wood was an amazing Frodo. Sean Astin stole the show as Samwise Gamgee. Obviously, Ian McKellen was a total badass as Gandalf. The entire cast, Viggo Mortensen was awesome. Sean Bean, Liv Tyler, Cate Blanchett. This cast is absolutely incredible, and they all deliver amazing performances. Even Orlando Bloom killed it in this film, which says a lot. So yeah, there's a lot to love in this movie, so I have no doubts that it is now, and it always will be, in my top 5.
I think I spoke a little bit about Fellowship in the director's episode, which again might or might not be out right now. And again, so hopefully I don't repeat what I said then, but I don't think I will. But yeah, I completely agree with you on the Fellowship. That is also my favourite of the 3. I love I think the first half an hour, like in particular, is one of the best opening sort of acts to a film. I love all the stuff in Hobbiton. I love the whole birthday party sequence with all the crazy sort of fireworks and the dragon bit. I remember seeing that in the cinema as a kid and just being like, what am I watching? And it only gets better from there. Every scene is memorable. The Nazgul fight on the, I forget the name of the place, but on the old Ranger's Beacon, where Frodo drops into the sort of Shadow Realm briefly. That's a really memorable scene. All of the scenes with the Ringwraiths, actually, just the way that they're hunting them constantly, it's terrifying. It's my favourite of the Lord of the Rings films too. I think it's brilliant. The other ones are, you're right, it's kind of like one big sort of film, but as an opening chapter, what a great way to start a trilogy. Right, so I'll go on to my number one. After all of these sort of weird art house films, what will I pick? It is Aliens by James Cameron. If someone put a gun to my head and told me to choose my favourite film, I would say Aliens. I've seen it countless times, twice in the cinema, I think. Once as a Halloween double bill with Alien, which was absolutely awesome. And I've enjoyed it every single viewing, which must be sort of, 20 plus sort of times. Probably even more, though. It's got everything. Tension, horror, memorable characters, drama, aliens, nukes, knives, sharp sticks. I can watch this film anytime, anywhere. It is the ultimate sequel. It expands on the material of the original without losing any of the stuff that made the original so good. I actually find the tense scenes in Aliens to be even more pulse-pounding than those in Alien, and the action scenes are never overblown in the way that action films in the 80s often were. The pacing is perfect, allowing for most of the film to be like a real slow burn that sets up the intensity of the final act. The characters, they're simple but effective. They're kind of atypical reversals of archetypes, and they're allowed to develop with the situation they're placed in, rather than just sort of being bland stereotypes. Ripley in particular is handled incredibly well, and I think Sigourney Weaver hands in her best performance as Ripley in this film. She gets across just the right blend of kindness and wrath, strength and vulnerability, and this, along with her motherhood arc, makes her, to my mind, one of the best protagonists in movie history. Bill Paxton as Hudson is another great character. His arc is so simple, but so believable at the same time. Paxton nails the sort of sheep in badass clothing type that Hudson embodies. He feels real, the soldier who does great in training and can't wait to kill and thinks that him and his crew are the bee's knees until he realises what war is really like, and has a bit of a breakdown. But he's got a good heart, and this never lets him down, right up to the end. Gorman, again, goes through a similar transformation. Him and Vasquez's interactions and the way those develop, they're one of my favourite minor parts of the film. I think Aliens remains James Cameron's masterpiece. It exhibits all of what is good about its filmmaking. Engaging worlds, top-notch pacing, quotable lines, and tasteful action set pieces. I probably know half the script by memory by now. Even the more sort of obscure scenes contain lines that are embedded into my mind. I had some debate with one of my friends about the portrayal of the aliens themselves, but personally some people say it's not as good as in the original, because in the first one it's one terrifying alien that's hunting them all, and this one they almost become sort of fodder. And in some ways I agree, and in some ways I disagree, but I actually really like the way that we see the aliens. I mean, it's called Aliens, there's multiple of them. We see them as a community, and the way that they have developed to be this ultimate sort of predator race. In the first one, that's just one of them could do that to a bunch of people. So when you've got absolutely loads of them, the first time the Marines go up against them, they get absolutely trashed because they have no experience fighting things like this before. And although there are many of them and some of them do kind of die quite easily, I think the idea of them as a hive is put across really, really well, and very scarily as well. The way that they know the environment, they can turn off the power, even though, as Hudson says, they're animals, but they are very smart animals, and they know how to hunt. My one issue with Aliens is that it doesn't exist in a perfect cut. The theatrical version is the one I personally favour, but it misses out the detail early on about Ripley's daughter, which I think is key to her arc. But the director's cut, whilst adding some good material, it also features a real sort of mystery killing scene on the colony before everything goes to pot that shows too much, ruins some of the tension, as well as the pointless scene with the automatic guns, which is just kind of there for some reason. But despite this, I'm usually happy to watch either version. The material, I think, is just strong enough to remain exciting and engaging no matter what. To this day, I think Aliens is Hollywood's best genre-busting action flick. Although undoubtedly commercial in nature, it doesn't sacrifice that for depth, innovation, or experimentation. Its precise genre is often contentious in groups of film fans. Some say it's primarily an action film, some say no, it's primarily a sci-fi, no, it's primarily a horror, and of course they're all right. Cameron blends these styles so perfectly that it just feels natural, and when the humour breaks through, it shines equally as bright. It's tight, playful, engaging, terrifying, and just generally great fun, and all of these in just the right amounts as well, and that's why to this day, I consider it to be my favourite film.
Finally, a film that I've actually seen, and I've actually seen this one from beginning to end as well, which helps, although I didn't see it until last year, and I'm still not sure which version of the film I actually saw, but growing up and seeing it, I was never really bothered about seeing the Alien films. I'm not a big horror fan, but then we watched it in a lecture at the end of my third year, I think, and I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed this film. I thought the characters were awesome, the monsters were really cool. I really liked that there were a lot of the creatures, the monsters, I've forgotten the names.
Xenomorphs. Well, it's kind of... You're not really sure in the film if they actually refer to them as xenomorphs, but it caught on. That's generally what they're called. Or just aliens.
We'll stick with aliens. But yeah, I didn't think it was scary. As someone that's not a fan of horror, I didn't actually find it as scary as the Alien franchise had been kind of hyped up to be. But like I said, I really enjoyed this film. Not enough for it to be in my top 5 really, but I completely get why it's in yours, knowing how much you like that franchise and that film. So I'll just jump straight into my last film, and the film that I'm going to talk about probably won't surprise a lot of people, and I imagine it will most likely appear on more than a few of your lists, because the last film I'm going to talk about is probably my favourite film of all time, and it's Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. Like I said when I was talking about Guardians of the Galaxy, I'm a big fan of comic books, and even though I always kind of preferred to read and watch Superman when I was a kid, as I've gotten older, I've kind of leaned more over towards Batman. So to see Christopher Nolan, one of my favourite directors of all time, to see him continue Batman's story after Batman Begins and create this really, I wouldn't say it's gritty, it's more of a serious tone, and really it's more than just a comic book movie. The Dark Knight is a political crime thriller, and I think with this film, Christopher Nolan was able to take the superhero kind of comic book movie genre and elevate it to a completely new level. This movie changed the game forever for one of my favourite film genres, and for me, I don't think we ever will see a comic book movie that is able to kind of match The Dark Knight in terms of quality. And then obviously you've got Heath Ledger's performance as the Joker, which to this day stands as my favourite performance in any film. A lot of people say that the film isn't as great as the performance, but I think that even without Heath Ledger as the Joker, this would still have been a great film, but thankfully we got one of the greatest performances ever within one of the greatest films ever. And then you've got to talk about Christian Bale, because he again killed it as Batman. He was such a different kind of Dark Knight than even the one that we met in Batman Begins, and I really enjoyed the way that Bale and Nolan evolved that character, even though he was completely outshined and outacted by Heath Ledger in that film. And then obviously I've got to talk about the last act of the film, and the switch from the Joker being the primary villain to Two-Face. That transformation that Harvey Dent went through from good guy and White Knight to the main villain was incredible. Nolan played with a lot of themes in this film about what it means to be good, what it means to be bad. He did a really good job of making us see who Harvey Dent was and what he kind of meant to Batman and to Gotham, and then he made it even harder when he kind of turned. I think that Aaron Eckhart did a really good job as Two-Face and Harvey Dent in this film, and that kind of twist and that turn at the end really pushed this film and made it so much better. So yeah, that's the last of my top 5 films ever.
Can't disagree with you there. Dark Knight, probably my favourite Nolan film as well. I mean, I think Interstellar's possibly even better just because of its reach, but The Dark Knight I think is brilliant. I was actually having a conversation about Nolan yesterday with one of my mates, and he described Nolan as a mathematician. So he's got this very sort of calculated mind where he knows how to put all the parts together really well, and that's where he shines the most. Like Memento's all about sequencing, Interstellar's got a lot of sort of physics behind it and stuff. And The Dark Knight, I think you can apply the whole sort of mathematician idea just in how well it's structured. For a film that's as long as it is, I never get bored watching it. It's always got a sort of sense of sort of tension, and you know where the next scene's going to come, and it just sort of keeps the punches up. And yeah, I just think it's fantastic. It's definitely in, I'm not sure because I did do a top sort of 100 at some point, but it's definitely on there sort of at a decent sort of placing, just because all of the different elements of it just work together. And again, yeah, like you say, Heath Ledger, one of the best performances I've probably seen. So I can't argue with you there, man. Like, it's a good pick.
Yeah, with Christopher Nolan, I feel like he took everything that he'd learned before this film and everything that he kind of learned with the first Batman film, and he kind of just pushed himself to create this really kind of unique Batman story. And I think this is the film that he'll kind of be remembered for, even though Interstellar was awesome. I agree, Interstellar is one of his best. I think The Prestige is one of his best as well. Obviously Dunkirk's getting a lot of attention right now. So like you say about him just being able to really well structure a film, I think you're absolutely right. And actually I think, like you said about a top 100 list, after this I think it would be interesting to kind of go through and make a top 100 list for myself, just to see how many of Nolan's films actually appear, because I'm a really big Nolan fan, so that'd be quite a cool experiment. But that's it for this episode of the Scene to Screen Film Podcast. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you've got some spare time, why not head over to iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher or YouTube? Like I said, we've got some new reviews on there, so why not check some of those out? If you liked this episode, why not hit subscribe so you don't miss any future podcasts? Again, I want to say thanks for listening, and I will hopefully see you in the next episode.
Yep, catch you later, guys. You're great, all of you.